I'll never forget the sound of my pregnant wife's scream as she tumbled down the front steps pushed by our HOA president. Karen, her hands clawed at the railing, but it was too late. She landed hard on the walkway, clutching her belly, gasping in pain. And Karen. She stood at the top of the stairs, phone in hand, smirking as if she'd just won some twisted game. But less than 2 minutes later, the distant rumble of engines broke the silence. 6 Marines, broad-shouldered, boots hitting the pavement in perfect rhythm, marched straight toward our house. The moment Karen realized who they were, her smirk vanished, replaced by the kind of fear you can't fake. We'd only been living in this neighborhood for 3 months. My wife and I had been looking for somewhere peaceful to settle in before our first child arrived. I pictured quiet evenings on the porch, friendly nods from neighbors, and maybe the occasional block barbecue. Instead, we landed in the middle of an HOA dictatorship, and Karen was the self-appointed queen. From the very first week, she was on us. She knocked on our door about the color of our front door too bright, complained about my truck parked a few inches too close to the sidewalk, and once even told my wife her flower pots clashed with the neighborhood's aesthetic. She didn't say hello. She issued orders. Karen was in her late 50s, with perfectly bleached blonde hair, designer sunglasses she wore even in the shade, and an endless supply of brightly colored blouses that could probably be seen from space. She carried a clipboard like it was an extension of her arm and strutted around the block as though she owned every square inch. My wife, on the other hand, was in her 7th month of pregnancy, glowing, beautiful, but moving slower these days. Every step was deliberate. She'd been nesting lately, baking pies and dropping off slices to the neighbors we actually liked. On that fateful morning, she'd decided to take a plate of fresh pumpkin bread to Mrs. Henderson, who lived 2 houses down. I was in the garage, fixing a loose hinge on the workbench, when I heard voices. One was my wife's, calm but firm. The other, shrill, sharp, and instantly recognizable. "You can't leave things on the steps. It's against HOA rules." Karen's voice cut through the air like nails on a chalkboard. I stepped out in time to see her standing at the top of our porch steps, blocking my wife's way. My wife held the plate of pumpkin bread in one hand and the railing with the other, looking puzzled. "It's just for a minute, Karen," my wife said gently. "I'm dropping this off next door." Karen took a step closer. "A minute is all it takes for the whole place to look like a mess. You people think you can move in here?" And before she could finish, she gave my wife a shove. It wasn't hard enough to look like an accident, but it was forceful, a mean, deliberate push aimed right at her shoulder. My wife's eyes went wide as she stumbled backward, missing the top step entirely. I'll never forget the thud when she hit the bottom. The plate shattered beside her, pumpkin bread scattering across the walkway. She gasped, one hand clutching her belly, the other pressing against her forehead where blood was already starting to trickle. I sprinted to her, dropping to my knees. "Honey, are you okay?" My hands shook as I checked her over. She was conscious, breathing, but her ankle looked twisted. From above, Karen folded her arms. "She's faking it. Pregnant women are dramatic." She even pulled out her phone and started recording us. "Look at this. Making a scene." I wanted to explode right there, but my first priority was my wife. I scooped her into my arms and carried her inside, yelling for my phone. My voice must have carried, because within seconds, a few neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. None of them came closer. Inside, I called our family doctor. While I was on the phone, Karen's voice floated in through the open window. She was live streaming to the neighborhood Facebook group saying we were troublemakers who didn't respect community rules. When the doctor arrived, he checked my wife carefully. "She's going to be fine," he said, "but she needs to rest, keep that ankle elevated, and monitor for any signs of preterm labor." I nodded, jaw tight. The anger in my chest felt like a live wire, but I knew yelling at Karen would only make things worse. She thrived on drama. As the doctor packed up his bag, my phone buzzed. It was my younger brother, Mike, calling from out of state. "Hey, how's the baby?" he asked. I hesitated. "We're okay," but something happened. The HOA president, she pushed Emma down the steps. There was a pause, then a low, steady voice. She did what I explained quickly, still trying to keep my voice down so my wife wouldn't worry more than she already was. Mike listened without interrupting. "Finally," he said. "I'll be there." "You don't have to, I'll be there," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "And I'm not coming alone." I didn't know what he meant at the time, but the slight edge in his voice sent a strange mix of relief and anticipation through me. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. The rest of that afternoon was a blur. Emma lay on the couch with her foot propped on a pillow, an ice pack over her ankle. I tried to keep my voice light as I brought her tea, but my mind was racing. Every time I replayed that shove in my head, my fists clenched. Karen hadn't just crossed a line, she'd bulldozed over it with a grin on her face. Outside, she wasn't done. From the living room window, I could see her standing at the edge of our walkway, talking into her phone like some tabloid reporter. She gestured toward our house, lips curling in exaggerated disgust. I could almost hear her, "They're nothing but trouble." Then she tilted her phone and aimed it at our porch, as if she were waiting for me to lose my temper so she could capture it on camera. I closed the curtains. A few hours later, my phone pinged with a notification. A neighbor had sent me a screenshot from the HOA Facebook group. There was Karen live streaming our dangerous behavior, saying Emma had staged her fall to make Karen look bad. The comments were a mix, some siding with her, others cautiously asking for proof. Proof was the one thing I had in spades. Our security cameras had caught everything: the words, the shove, the fall. I downloaded the footage and stored it in 3 separate places. If Karen wanted a war of stories, I had the truth on my side. Still, I knew it wouldn't be simple. Karen had been HOA president for nearly a decade. She had her little circle of loyalists, the type who would believe her even if she claimed the sky was green. I needed backup. That's when Mike's earlier words echoed in my mind. "I'm not coming alone." Mike had served 2 tours as a Marine. He wasn't the type to bluff. I figured he might bring another veteran friend or two, maybe just for moral support. But something in his tone told me he had a bigger plan. As I was contemplating my next move, a knock sounded at the door. I opened it to find a white envelope sitting on the welcome mat. No postage, just my name written in sharp, aggressive handwriting. Inside was an official-looking letter on HOA stationery. It read, "This notice serves as a formal warning for conduct unbecoming of a community resident. Your household is hereby fined $250 for creating a public disturbance and damaging the reputation of the HOA." I let out a bitter laugh. Damaging their reputation. Karen had pushed my pregnant wife, and somehow we were the ones fined. The letter was signed, of course, by Karen herself. Emma saw the paper in my hand and frowned. "What's that?" "Nothing you need to worry about right now," I said, folding it. She didn't need the added stress. That night, as Emma rested, I sat at the kitchen table making calls. First to a lawyer I knew from my previous job, then to 2 neighbors I trusted who had witnessed at least part of the incident. Both agreed to give statements if needed. At 10 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Mike Landing at 0900. "Tell Karen to have her best poker face ready." I smirked. Mike didn't play games. The next morning, the neighborhood was unusually quiet. Karen's SUV was parked in her driveway, the same spot she used like a throne from which she could survey her kingdom. Emma was still asleep, so I stepped outside to grab the paper. That's when I heard the low, steady rumble of an engine, not the high whine of a commuter car. This was deeper, heavier. Down the street, a dark green military Humvee rounded the corner. Behind it, another followed, and then a black SUV with tinted windows. My pulse quickened. The convoy rolled to a stop right in front of our house. Mike stepped out first, wearing his marine dress blues. Even out of uniform, he had the kind of presence that turned heads. But in that moment, he looked like he could command a battlefield. 5 other Marines followed, each standing tall, boots polished, eyes sharp. They weren't there to intimidate physically, though they certainly could have, but to send a message. Karen, drawn by the commotion, emerged from her house. She had a coffee mug in one hand and her phone in the other. Her brows knit together when she saw the uniforms. "What's going on here?" she called, her voice higher than usual. Mike didn't answer right away. He and his team walked up the driveway, their boots hitting the pavement in perfect unison. When they reached me, he gave me a firm hug, then turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, polite but with an undertone of steel. "We're here to ensure my brother's family is safe and treated fairly. I understand there was an incident." Karen blinked rapidly, her confidence faltering for the first time since I'd met her. I don't know what you've heard," but Mike held up a hand. "I've seen the footage." She froze. 6 Marines don't show up for gossip. He continued, "We're here to protect family and to make sure no one hides behind a title to avoid accountability." The other Marines spread out casually, but strategically, one near our walkway, another by the curb, 2 more in the front yard, and 1 leaning against the Humvee. They weren't aggressive, but they radiated authority. Karen's hand trembled around her coffee mug. "This is a misunderstanding." "Then you won't mind clearing it up," Mike said, his voice even. "In front of the right people." Her eyes darted to the neighbors who had come out to watch. Phones were out, recording every word. For the first time, I saw the faintest crack in her armor, and something told me that crack was about to widen. The rest of the morning felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. The Marines weren't doing anything overtly confrontational, but their presence was impossible to ignore. Neighbors who usually hurried past our house now lingered on the sidewalks, whispering to each other. A few were clearly enjoying the spectacle. HOA drama was their version of daytime TV. Karen, however, was unraveling. She hovered near her front steps, pacing back and forth, phone glued to her ear. Every few minutes, she'd glance over at us, then quickly look away. Mike stayed calm, leaning against the porch railing with his arms crossed, the picture of patience. "She's rattled," he murmured to me. "That's good, but rattled isn't enough. We need her on record." I knew what he meant. Karen was the type to twist facts until they snapped. Unless we had her admitting what she did, or at least lying in a way we could prove false, she'd try to weasel her way out. So we waited. Around 10:30, a silver sedan pulled up. Out stepped Bill Patterson, the HOA vice president and Karen's closest ally. Bill was a tall, thin man with the permanent squint of someone who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. He walked straight up to Mike and me. "Gentlemen," he said, forcing a polite smile, "this is a private community matter. I don't think we need whatever this is." Mike's jaw tightened. "What this is, Mr. Patterson, is a family matter. And in my experience, when someone lays a hand on a pregnant woman, it stops being private real fast." Bill's smile flickered. "I've been told there was no physical altercation." Mike reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped the screen. Within seconds, the security footage was playing the shove, the stumble, the fall. No room for misinterpretation. Bill's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "Well, perhaps this should be discussed in the next HOA meeting." I cut in. "It'll be discussed with the police." Karen's voice suddenly cut through the air. "You're exaggerating." She tripped. Half the neighborhood turned toward her. Mike didn't flinch. "Is that your official statement, ma'am?" Karen hesitated. Her eyes darted to the crowd, to Bill, to the Marines spaced like sentinels around the yard. Before she could answer, another car arrived, a black and white cruiser. Officer Daniels, a stocky man in his 40s, stepped out. I recognized him. He'd been called out before for HOA disputes, usually siding with whoever made the call first. Karen's face lit up like she'd just been handed a lifeline. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. These men are intimidating me." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "These Marines." "Yes," she cried, gesturing wildly. "They just showed up." "And ma'am," Daniels interrupted, his tone flat. "Before you say another word, I need you to know this conversation is being recorded." He pointed to the body camera on his chest. Karen faltered. Mike stepped forward. "Officer, I have footage of this woman physically assaulting my pregnant sister-in-law." He handed over a flash drive and multiple witnesses. Daniels glanced at the Marines, then at the small crowd of neighbors. "All right, let's see it." We all gathered around as he plugged the drive into his cruiser's onboard computer. The video played again, this time on the small screen mounted in the dash. Karen's voice from the recording, "You people think you can move in here," and cut off as her shove sent Emma sprawling. Daniels didn't look at Karen when it ended. He just said, "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me to answer some questions downtown. Karen's mouth dropped open. What I didn't mean. Bill stepped forward, clearly flustered. Surely this can be handled internally. No, sir, Daniels said firmly. An assault on a pregnant woman is a criminal matter. HOA jurisdiction doesn't override state law. The crowd murmured. Phones were filming from every angle now. Karen's face flushed red, then pale. She turned to me. Of all people, you're ruining my life. I almost laughed. Funny. That's exactly what you tried to do to mine. Daniels gestured toward the cruiser. Let's go. As she was led toward the car, Karen's composure finally cracked. Her eyes filled with tears. This isn't fair, I didn't, but the door shut before she could finish. For a moment, the street was silent except for the low hum of the cruiser's engine. Then one of the Marines, a tall, dark-haired guy named Alvarez, let out a low whistle. That's one for the record books. Mike clapped me on the shoulder. Phase 1 complete. I frowned. Phase 1, he grinned. Oh, we're just getting started. She's not just going to answer to the police. She's going to answer to every single person she's ever pushed around in this neighborhood. And judging by the way neighbors were starting to gather closer, I realized Mike was right. This wasn't just my fight anymore. Karen spent the next 2 days off the streets, which was unusual. Normally, she was out patrolling the block like a self-appointed sheriff, but after being led away in a cruiser, she seemed to vanish. That didn't mean things had quieted down. Quite the opposite. The HOA Facebook group lit up like a Christmas tree. Some posts defended her, claiming the video was misleading and that she'd been set up. Others, far more of them, were openly questioning her leadership. I stayed off the comments, but I kept reading. Mike, however, dove right in. Every time she or her friends post something, he told me over coffee. I respond with a polite link to the video. No insults, no yelling, just the facts. By the second day, that video had been shared outside the group, spreading to a local community page. The title someone gave it, HOA President Pushes Pregnant Woman Gets Marines at Her Door. It was catchy. I'll give them that. On the third morning, Mike asked me to meet him at the local diner. When I arrived, he was already in a booth with 2 of his Marine buddies, Alvarez and Jones. And sitting across from them, to my surprise, was a woman in a navy blue blazer, a gold badge clipped to her belt. This, Mike said with a grin, is Special Agent Marissa Cole, United States Marine Corps Criminal Investigation Division. I blinked. Criminal? Investigation Agent Cole nodded. I handle cases involving service members, veterans, and crimes committed against them or their families. Mike gave me the rundown, and I took an interest. Alvarez smirked. Translation: Karen picked the wrong family to mess with. Mike leaned forward. Turns out, when you assault the spouse of an active or former service member, especially one with medical consequences, it can trigger a whole chain of protections under both state and federal law. Agent Cole pulled out a folder and slid it toward me. Inside were printed screenshots of HOA bylaws, local assault statutes, and something I hadn't expected: Karen's own criminal record. Wait, I said, flipping through. She's been arrested before 2 times. Cole confirmed. Once for disorderly conduct at a city council meeting, and once for trespassing. Both charges were pled down, but the records are public. Mike sat back, arms crossed. She's been riding on intimidation for years. Time to show the neighborhood exactly who's been giving them orders. That afternoon, the Marines came over in casual clothes, jeans, t-shirts, ball caps, but they still looked like they could walk into a recruitment poster. Mike handed out assignments. Like a squad leader, 2 of them would discreetly talk to neighbors about their experiences with Karen. Another would gather statements from anyone she'd wronged, and one would compile everything into a neat packet. Meanwhile, Agent Cole started making calls to the county prosecutor's office, ensuring they were aware of the video and Karen's past behavior. I had no idea how fast things were about to move. By the end of the day, we had 5 sworn statements from neighbors, 3 about verbal harassment, 1 about a petty fine that violated HOA bylaws, and 1 about her trying to force entry into someone's home to inspect for compliance. But the real bombshell dropped that evening. Jones, the youngest Marine in the group, knocked on my door holding a manila envelope. "You're gonna like this," he said. Inside were copies of Karen's financial disclosures as HOA president and a few glaring inconsistencies. There were maintenance fees paid to companies that didn't exist, and event budgets for gatherings that never happened. "She's been skimming," Jones said flatly. "Not much at a time, but enough to add up." I stared at the numbers. "And you're sure positive? I used to handle logistics for my unit. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping. This is deliberate." Mike smiled like a cat spotting a cornered mouse. "We've got her on assault, abuse of power, and embezzlement. She's not walking away from this." The next morning, Mike suggested we take a friendly walk to the HOA office. All 6 Marines came along, dressed sharp but casual, and Agent Cole joined us. The HOA office was a small brick building near the community center. When we walked in, Karen was there back in her throne behind the front desk, wearing a pale blue blouse and trying hard to look composed. Her eyes flicked up, then down again, as if pretending she hadn't seen us. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked stiffly. Mike leaned on the counter. "Nope, just bringing you some paperwork." He slid the manila envelope toward her. She hesitated before opening it. As her eyes scanned the first page, her cheeks flushed. By the 3rd page, her lips had gone pale. "What is this?" she demanded. "That," Mike said, "is a complete record of your recent activities, including some that might interest the county prosecutor." Karen's hand trembled. You can't just..." Agent Cole stepped forward, flipping open her badge. "I can, and I will. I'm a federal investigator, and I suggest you stop talking before you make this worse for yourself." The room went still. Even Bill Patterson, who'd been lurking in the back, looked like he wanted to melt into the wall. Karen swallowed hard. "You don't understand." "No," I cut in, my voice calm but firm. "You don't understand. You hurt my wife. You've been hurting people here for years. And now, everyone's going to know the truth." Cole closed the folder and tucked it under her arm. "Expect to be contacted by law enforcement soon. And in the meantime, you might want to consider stepping down before the HOA votes you out publicly." Karen didn't answer. She just stared at the countertop, breathing hard. As we walked out, Mike said quietly, "That's the look of someone who just realized the ground under her feet is gone." He was right, and I had a feeling she was about to hit it hard. Karen didn't resign. That was her first mistake. 2 days after our visit to the HOA office, a notice went out announcing the next HOA meeting. It was clear she intended to bluff her way through, maybe spin a new story to her loyalists. Mike just smiled when I showed him the notice. "Perfect timing." He said, "We'll bring the whole truth into the light and make sure there's nowhere for her to hide." The week leading up to the meeting felt like a slow drum roll. The Marines were still in town, and they weren't just sitting around. Alvarez and Jones visited every house in the neighborhood, quietly sharing the security footage and Karen's financial inconsistencies. They didn't push anyone to take sides. They didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Agent Cole, meanwhile, coordinated with the county prosecutor. The assault charge was already in motion, but now they were reviewing the financial documents. The prosecutor's office even requested copies of the HOA bylaws to see if any of Karen's fees violated state law. By the day of the meeting, the air in the neighborhood was electric. You could feel it. People knew something big was coming. The HOA meetings were usually dull affairs in a small conference room at the community center. This time, it was standing room only. Rows of folding chairs filled the room, and people lined the walls. Even the back door was propped open to accommodate those spilling into the hallway. Karen sat at the head table, flanked by Bill Patterson and 2 other board members. She dressed in a coral blazer and heavy pearl necklace, smiling like a politician on election night. The meeting opened with the usual roll call and agenda, but when Karen moved to community concerns, Mike stood up. The room immediately went quiet. "My name's Mike Turner," he began, "and I'm here on behalf of my brother and his wife, who many of you know were involved in an incident last week." Karen's smile tightened. "We're not here to discuss personal disputes." Mike held up a hand. "This isn't personal. This is about the safety and integrity of this community." He turned toward the crowd. "Some of you have seen the video. For those who haven't," he pulled a small projector from his backpack and set it on the table. A white sheet had been tacked to the wall behind the board. The moment the footage began to play, Karen's shove, Emma's fall, the room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, and a few outright shouts filled the air. Karen jumped to her feet. "This is taken out of context. No context justifies that," Mike said flatly. Before she could respond, Agent Cole stepped forward. "For those I haven't met, I'm Special Agent Marissa Cole, United States Marine Corps Criminal Investigation Division. I have reason to believe this incident may constitute criminal assault under state law. Charges are pending." A ripple went through the room. Karen's coral blazer seemed to lose its color. And Cole continued, "During the course of this investigation, additional concerns were raised about the management of HOA funds. Those concerns have been forwarded to the county prosecutor's office for review." At that, Jones stepped forward and handed out copies of the financial records to the board members and to several residents in the front row, who immediately began flipping through them. One older man in the third row spoke up. "Wait a second. You charged us for a 4th of July picnic that never happened." Karen's voice was shrill. "It was canceled due to weather. It was sunny all day." Another neighbor shouted, "I remember because I grilled outside." More voices joined in. "And what about the landscaping bill? My brother runs a landscaping company. That business doesn't even exist." Karen's pearl necklace shifted as she swallowed hard. Bill tried to interject, but the noise in the room was rising. That's when Alvarez raised his voice, cutting through the chaos. "Folks, we're not here to yell. We're here to take action." He nodded toward a resident holding a folder. "As per HOA bylaws, any member can motion for a vote to remove a board member for misconduct." The woman stood. "I make that motion." Another voice immediately followed. "I second it." Karen slammed her palm on the table. "This is ridiculous. You can't just, 'Yes, we can,'" the woman said sharply. "Page 14 of the bylaws. We've all read it now." The vote was swift. One by one, hands shot up. Even 2 of the board members voted for removal. When the count was read 34 in favor, 5 against, it was over. Karen was officially out. The room erupted again, this time with applause. Mike turned to me, smiling. Phase 2 complete. But the night wasn't done. As people began filing out, Cole approached Karen with a folded document. "This is an official notice to appear for questioning at the county courthouse. Failure to comply will result in a warrant for your arrest." Karen's eyes darted around the room, but no one would meet her gaze. The power she'd wielded for years had evaporated in less than an hour. I watched her gather her things with trembling hands. No pearls, no blazer, no clipboard could shield her now. As we stepped outside, neighbors clapped me on the back, some even hugging Emma. One older gentleman said, "About time someone stood up to her." Mike grinned at me. "Now comes the part she'll really hate watching this neighborhood thrive without her." The morning after the HOA meeting, the neighborhood felt different, lighter. You could almost sense the collective exhale after years of Karen's rule. People who'd barely made eye contact before now waved, stopped to chat, even brought over pies and casseroles for Emma. But Karen, she was nowhere to be seen. That didn't last. 3 days later, I was in the front yard fixing a loose hinge on the gate when a black sedan with government plates rolled up. Out stepped Agent Cole, crisp in her blazer, followed by 2 county deputies. She nodded to me. "We're here for the final piece." I didn't have to ask what she meant. They walked straight to Karen's house. Within minutes, she appeared at the door, wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, her hair a frizzy mess. The contrast from her usual polished appearance was startling. "What now?" she demanded, arms crossed. Cole's voice was calm, almost clinical. "Karen Whitmore, you are under investigation for multiple counts of embezzlement related to HOA funds and for assault on a pregnant woman. You've been served notice to appear in court, and today we're executing a search warrant for HOA financial records and your personal devices." Karen's mouth fell open. "This is harassment. You can't." "Yes, we can," one of the deputies said, stepping past her into the house. Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the sight of uniformed officers on her porch. Phones came out, recording everything. Karen's voice rose. "All of you stop filming. This is illegal," from across the street. Mr. Jennings, the retired postal worker, called out. "Not illegal if it's in public." "Karen, That got a few chuckles from the crowd. I stood at the edge of my yard, watching as boxes of files, a laptop, and even a tablet were carried out and loaded into the deputy's vehicle. Karen turned her glare on me. "This is your fault." I didn't raise my voice. "No, Karen, this is yours." Her eyes darted to Mike, who was leaning casually against the hood of his truck, arms folded. "And you brought in those soldiers to intimidate me." Mike's tone was steady. "No, ma'am. We came to protect family. And it turns out, protecting this community meant protecting them from you." One of the deputies approached Karen with a small plastic bag. "Ma'am, we'll need to take your phone as part of the warrant." That seemed to shatter whatever composure she had left. "Do you have any idea who I am?" she shouted. Agent Cole's reply was ice cold. "Yes, and so does the entire county now." By the time they finished, Karen was left standing on her porch, empty-handed, her empire dismantled in front of an audience she could no longer command. But the real blow came a week later, in court. The courtroom was packed. Emma sat beside me, her ankles still bandaged but healing well. Mike and the Marines filled the row behind us like a wall of support. Karen's lawyer tried to spin the assault as an unfortunate accident, but the security footage played on the big screen silenced that argument in seconds. Then came the financial evidence, pages of falsified invoices, non-existent vendors, and unauthorized maintenance fees scrolled across the projector. With each new slide, Karen's shoulders sank lower. When the judge finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of finality. "Mrs. Whitmore, your actions represent a gross abuse of trust. You are hereby removed from any position of authority within this or any HOA in the state, fined $15,000 in restitution to the community, and ordered to pay medical and emotional damages to the Turners in the amount of $20,000. The gavel struck. Karen flinched at the sound, but the humiliation wasn't over. The judge also required her to issue a public apology, to be read at the next HOA meeting, which, given her removal, she would attend only as a regular resident. The following week, she stood at the front of the same room where she'd once ruled like a queen. The new HOA president, a quiet but respected neighbor named Linda, handed her the written apology. Karen's voice shook as she read, "I sincerely apologize to Emma Turner and her family for my actions, which caused harm and distress. My behavior was unacceptable and does not reflect the values of our community." The words sounded forced, but that didn't matter. The sight of her saying them, in front of every neighbor she'd ever bullied, was more satisfying than I'd imagined. As she stepped down, no one clapped. No one spoke to her. She walked past me without a glance, her shoulders hunched, the weight of her own choices finally pressing down. Mike leaned toward me and whispered, "Phase 3, justice served." We walked home that night under a quiet, starry sky. For the first time since moving here, I felt like this was truly our neighborhood. And no matter what happened next, Karen would never again have the power to hurt us or anyone else in it. Life after Karen was almost unrecognizable. The first week after her removal, the neighborhood felt like someone had lifted a thick, oppressive curtain. People were friendlier. The new HOA board, led by Linda, focused on actual community improvements instead of nitpicking over mailbox colors and lawn heights. Emma could finally walk outside without feeling like she was under surveillance. The other day, she strolled to Mrs. Henderson's with a loaf of banana bread, and instead of an ambush from Karen, she got 3 waves and a hug from a neighbor she barely knew before. Mike and the Marines stayed in town for another week, helping with small projects, fixing a broken fence for an elderly couple, repainting the faded benches at the playground, even organizing a Saturday BBQ for everyone on the block. That BBQ became the moment the neighborhood truly bonded. Kids ran through sprinklers, adults laughed over burgers, and Mike got roped into telling old Marine stories to a group of wide-eyed teenagers. Emma sat beside me under the shade of an oak tree, smiling the whole time. "This is what we imagined when we moved here," she said softly. I nodded. It just took a little cleanup. Karen, meanwhile, became almost invisible. She still lived in the same house, but she no longer patrolled the streets or barked orders. She avoided eye contact, kept her head down, and when she did go out, it was usually late in the evening, when most neighbors were inside. Her fall from grace wasn't just public, it was permanent. The HOA bylaws, amended after her removal, now barred any board member from serving again if they'd been removed for misconduct. That rule might as well have been called the Karen Clause. One afternoon, Linda stopped by to thank us. She brought over a small plant for Emma's growing porch garden. "You two started something here," she said. "People were afraid to speak up before, but now they know they can. We've already had more volunteers for community projects in the last month than we did in the past 5 years combined." Emma's eyes softened. It wasn't just us. It was everyone who finally decided enough was enough. Mike, standing nearby, added, "And it doesn't hurt to have a little backup." He grinned, nodding toward the Marines. The most unexpected change came a few weeks later, when I saw Karen in her yard one morning, clipping hedges. She looked up, hesitated, then gave a small, awkward nod. I returned it without saying a word. I wasn't interested in revenge anymore. I'd gotten what I needed: safety, respect, and the knowledge that she could never hurt my family again. But I did notice something in her eyes, not anger this time, but something closer to resignation, maybe even regret. Time moved forward. Emma's ankle healed completely, and her pregnancy went smoothly. When our daughter was born in late fall, the Marines sent flowers, and the entire neighborhood decorated our porch with ribbons and a big Welcome Baby Turner banner. I'll never forget stepping outside that morning, holding our newborn, and seeing a line of neighbors waiting to drop off meals and gifts. It was the exact opposite of what our first months here had been, like a reminder that a neighborhood is only as strong as the people willing to stand together. That night, as I rocked my daughter to sleep, I thought about how quickly things can change when you refuse to stay silent. Karen had ruled through fear and intimidation for years, and in the end, it took a united front and a little military precision to bring her down. Mike was right. This wasn't just a win for us. It was a win for everyone on the block. And as I closed the curtains and looked out at the quiet street, I realized something: the best kind of revenge isn't just seeing the villain fall. It's making sure they can never rise again. In life, bullies often rely on one thing: the belief that people will stay silent. Karen's downfall proved that when good people stand together, even the loudest, most intimidating voice can be silenced. It's not always about fighting back with anger. Sometimes it's about gathering the truth, building a united front, and refusing to be pushed around any longer. For anyone facing a similar situation, remember, you don't have to face it alone. There's strength in community, and there's power in speaking up. If this story reminded you of a time you stood up for yourself or someone you love, share it in the comments below. And if you believe in holding people accountable, no matter their title, hit the like button and subscribe so you won't miss our next story. Together, we can make sure justice is always served.